Pastor, theologian, scholar, and regular Good Catholic contributor, Father Jeffrey Kirby, joins Good Catholic's Rachel Shrader on the Truth Be Bold podcast, a fearless, down-to-earth weekly discussion on the topics at the forefront of our Catholic life today.
Greetings, friends. Welcome to the podcast, Truth Be Bold, where we dive right into the real issues that we're facing in the midst of the 21st century, trying to be good Christian disciples. We hold no topics back. We want to dive into every issue that we might deal with, or families might deal with, or society might deal with, and try to explain how we're supposed to approach them or understand them as Christian disciples. How is it that in the midst of the challenges of this world, we remain faithful to the gospel of Jesus Christ? So I want to thank you again for joining us. I am Father Jeffrey Kirby.
And I'm Brendan Gatta.
And we have a guest host today. Thank you for joining us. So,
yeah, it's a pleasure.
And of course, we're bringing you in on a heavy topic. So, friends, we want to talk today about pornography. And we, of course, see the rampant spread of pornography in our society today and the real damage it's doing both to the human mind, to our understanding of one another, to marriages, to family. So it's very important that we just dive in and begin to address this. The irony is that before the pandemic, the bishops actually addressed and sent out a full pastoral letter on pornography. And we're really planning on addressing it in a systematic, multi-tiered way, because they realized, okay, this is something that's really addressing family life and really causing a lot of problems. Regrettably, the pandemic hit, and then that pastoral plan has been shelved and has not been brought forward yet. And I think that it might be time for us to look at this and say, okay, how is the church going to address this? Because it seems like everybody wants to talk about issues facing family life, and oftentimes they're very extreme issues sometimes that don't address the average family, whereas here we have one that probably affects the vast majority of families now, either through the spouses or through children, because pornography is everywhere. I mean, you check your email or you go to do a Google search and it's there. So I think it's very important that we talk about this issue of pornography. What do you think, Brendan?
No, I 100% agree with you. I think the reality is it has become so mainstream, and there's so much money there that for many of these organizations, they don't want it to fail. They don't want any changes, even restrictions. I know that Utah just had a bill recently talking about how that they're restricting it to 18 or older. You have to have login information. And there was an article talking about how everyone's having to find new VPNs so they can access, Pornhub, this major website. Wow. And that's just, that's the reality of our society today. It's and in some cases it's almost, celebrated. Yes. The sadness there is it's a celebrated thing. It's empowerment.
Yes.
And you probably every single week are hearing in the confessional how it's ruining families, and that's the sad truth. I know I hear it from my friends and family too, that, it breaks my heart that so many people are addicted to this and, have seen their lives, drastically change in such a negative light.
Yes, I think it's a real challenge to the church. I was shocked when the pandemic first hit and the first major industry to launch in terms of promoting itself was not the church. We learned some lessons, but the first large enterprise to really launch in that promotion was the porn industry. And when people were stuck at home and they weren't able to go to work or to be out in society, we saw a massive increase in pornography. And of course, those things cause addictions. So we're still dealing with that. So we had a problem before the pandemic that the bishops were going to address. Then the pandemic hits and the porn industry says, all right, this is our playground. And they launch. And then now we find ourselves here in the post-pandemic world with a lot of things that need to be addressed and cleaned up. And this topic needs to be talked about. It's interesting, growing up in the 1980s, there was a time when people spoke openly about God and were embarrassed about pornography. And to your point, I feel like we live in a society now where people are proud of their pornography and they're embarrassed about God. And it's regrettable how we've inversed this.
Yeah.
And this is, as you say, celebrated. This is a sign of maturity. Well, this is what adults do, right? And we even see some of our Protestant communities, their leadership even promote pornography within the married state. that this could be a way in order for a married couple to, spice it up a little bit. And I'm thinking, how can a Christian community, especially those claiming to be ministers of the gospel, promote this? And yet we find this. We find this in our society today. I think the big topic that we want to address with pornography is what it actually does to our minds, our hearts, our souls, and how it makes us see reality. So let me use a different example in order to draw a principle. Imagine if someone was always late to meetings, late to everything, right? And they always said, it's because my dog is sick, right? Or whatever, just pick whatever. That's what they always say, say. And they know they're lying, right? They're just saying this as the cover, right? Well, that starts getting compounded into their mind. And then they might be in a meeting and someone else walks in and says, I'm sorry, I'm late. My dog was sick. And they automatically think that person's lying, right? That person might actually be telling the truth.
Yeah.
Right? But because they have so shaped and molded their mind and their soul, they just project what's inside them upon the other. So if we can understand that principle, if we put that in pornography, imagine what pornography does to the understanding of human dignity, to our human bodies, to the soul and the understanding of another person, to love, to relationships. So it's as if we put these glasses on and that's all we can see. So if we're lying all the time, then that's all that we can see are lies, even if someone's telling the truth. If someone is constantly viewing pornography and engaged in that world, that's it. They're putting on these glasses and that's all they can see. They're stuck. It's the worst type of slavery.
Yep.
I like Pope St. John Paul II. He kind of shook it up a little bit. He said, pornography is wrong not because it shows too much of the person, but because it shows too little.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, let me explain that. We know as human beings, we're body and soul. And what pornography does is it distorts the mind to create and turn another person into a mere object. So it objectifies a person, a human being. And the person's body, solely their body, is used for personal pleasure. So it's the worst type of selfishness and narcissism. And what that does is it completely removes any understanding of the person's soul or their heart or the higher spiritual powers. They forget that that's a human being who is in relationships with other people. That's someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's sister, someone's brother. That's a human being, right? And all that is stripped instead. It's just, no, that is a body that is objectified for my pleasure. So to John Paul II's quote, pornography is wrong not because it shows too much, but too little of the human person. What do you think? Isn't that great?
No, I think it's wonderful. I mean, this is just such a deep conversation. I mean, there's so many things so many layers here that you can kind of go at. And, I think there's the reality of the person who's struggling with this sin that needs to probably be hearing this conversation. But then there's also the other people who are being affected by it that I think those are two different things, but they both need to be addressed. And I think if you've never struggled with addiction, it's almost impossible to fully understand what's going on in the mind of the person who's struggling with this sin. And I think that's something that from the outsider's perspective needs to be understood. You need to recognize that I'm not going to fully understand the draw that this is. I mean, I think back to when I was in 8th grade, I had 2 friends show me pornography for the first time. And praise God, it was not something that I continued to struggle with. But there was a short period in my life where that was real. And that was something that I was drawn to. And I look back at that now and I can say, I'm not happy that I had that situation or that sin was a part of my life. And it still affects me to this day. And yet I've been able to, with grace operating, be able to better empathize with people who are struggling in this. And I think there's so much there that, needs to be looked at of how do we accompany these people who are struggling, but then how do we also accompany those who are being affected by it? Because for the spouses and the children whose potential parent is caught in this, or for their best friend who's caught in this, or their boyfriend or girlfriend, I mean, changes, it warps everything. Yes. It warps even how you view the other person, as you're kind of saying, sharing that quote by John Paul II. And I think there's just so much there that needs to just kind of be understood. But I think, as you know better than anything, as Catholics, we have the sacraments to run to.
Right. That's right.
And I think, that's how, when I talk to friends of mine who are struggling with this, that's the first thing I kind of, share with them or tell them that is if I'm looking for a weapon to fight this battle, that's where it is. Go to the sacraments,
right.
Go to confession, and then receive the Eucharist. And that is where the graces are going to come to potentially find freedom. And then, of course, all the practical things too.
Exactly. And one thing as you talk about just how it affects different groups and different peoples, one thing I just want to address, because it used to be, at least historically, we would think of, well, pornography is something that men did and kind of hid from their wives, and that was kind of the general idea in terms of, we could say, the demographics of pornography. That's all gone.
Yeah.
This is now, pornography is almost as much a woman's issue as it is a men's issue. And this isn't just the husband hiding porn, if he's hiding it at all, but the wife. And we now, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of some Protestant communities nurturing this even, have married couples engaged in pornography.
Yep.
And we have situations where the parents are looking at the same pornography as their children within the same Christian home. So the demographics of pornography have all changed. So just as you mentioned that, Brendan, like that, just worth foot stomping that, if there's anyone who still thinks that, well, this is a guy issue and, no. And as we've mentioned a couple times, like this is something that's celebrated now. This has become a major issue morally, spiritually, emotionally, in terms of family life. And to go to your main point, which is, if people are finding themselves in this situation, what do they do, right? And I very much like the emphasis of the sacraments. Like, that's the beginning. Like, make a good confession. And if someone finds themselves in an addictive state, like that's where you go first and foremost. And then from there, like anyone who thinks that, well, I just go to the sacrament, that's okay.
No, there's more to it. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
We're not saying that, right?
No.
But we want to make sure we get first things first. And then from there, there's all kinds of really good Catholic resources. Of course, a good Catholic therapist, but then also like support groups. There are great digital support groups now.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, organizations and software that can help prevent it.
Yep.
So this is something that's really, as much as it needs to be addressed more, I do want to recognize there are some aspects of church life, some groups that are trying to address it.
Yeah.
And for the family that's trying to deal with it, to the person that's trying to break this addiction, there are helps, there are resources. But the point we are making is it has to start with the sacrament of confession. It has to begin with the absolution of sin, because then the soul is free. Then there's grace. The grace can begin to work. The person can begin to experience freedom. Because, imagine like to a soul that is constantly in mortal sin, it doesn't know what the freedom of Christ looks like. The soul doesn't know what it means to breathe in freedom. So we can be talking about this, and perhaps someone's listening who's severely stuck in pornography. And what do you mean go to confession? Or well, just realize that we can get so stuck in darkness that we forget what light looks like.
Yeah.
And once the soul begins to experience light and freedom, once the soul can breathe, then suddenly that's irresistible. It's worth every fight. And realize that all of the powers of our soul depend on the health of our soul. So, for example, love, hope, faith, giving thanks, selfless service, all the things that we need our soul to help us with. When the soul is enslaved, the soul can't do those things as well. So if someone's stuck in pornography, then it shouldn't surprise us that suddenly they might be struggling with faith, or they become more selfish in their love, or they become distracted and are not attentive to giving thanks, because the soul is wounded and sick.
Yeah.
The soul can't fully function, just like our body. Like if we were fighting cancer, our bodies would not be able to be as physically strong. Well, that happens the same with the soul, with sin. And with pornography, there can be great effects, mal-effects within the soul. Oof.
Yeah, well, one thing that after hearing all that you're saying, I think is also important to just kind of bring to the front is bringing it to the light. We talk about confession. That is a amazing tool. The graces are there. And in that moment, you are bringing your brokenness to the light. But it goes past that too. It's sharing your struggle with your loved ones. And of course, you have to do this with prudence at the forefront. If you just started a relationship and you're dating someone and it's only been a month, then maybe this isn't the time to bring that forward. But if you're married, it's much better, and you haven't talked about this with your spouse, it's much better for them to have that conversation holding one another in the bedroom together than having your spouse walk down the stairs at 3 a.m. and seeing you in the corner on your computer. Yeah. And I just think that the freedom that one can find with this addiction, but just any addiction or any sinful action, when it's brought to the light, it's amazing what the Lord can do with that. And there's a great story by Fulton Sheen. He went to the prisons, and he was in front of all these people, and he's like, how do I relate to them? And he just went up to them and he said, the difference between you and me is, he said, you were caught. And isn't that the truth for you and me as well? We have our sinfulness, and the Lord knows, of course, but we all struggle in some way. So to think that you are broken or wounded or, unable to be loved because of this, it's just not true. And the people in your life who love you want to help you, but it all starts with being open and vulnerable and sharing your struggles. And I think the Lord can do great things with that. So that's just one other thing. As you were saying, you're talking about all that, I just was like, yep, bring it to the light. I think it's just essential.
Absolutely. It reminds me of the wisdom of St. Paul. Tells us in his letter to the Romans, for all has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And if we remember our own sinfulness, suddenly we become a lot more humble, a lot more compassionate. And I will say this, spouses should not be surprised, or those in relationships should not be surprised if they open up to the one they love about their struggles with pornography, and the person reciprocates and says, actually, I'm struggling too, right?
Yeah.
Because we are flooded right now. Families, society is being flooded with this. And we just wanted to begin a conversation so that perhaps by us talking about it, maybe these conversations can happen in relationships. So if someone's struggling, they can perhaps find some strength to begin to talk about it. Maybe find that strength to get to confession, because this is something that causes severe damage to our minds, our hearts, our souls, capacity to love. So we just want to make sure we address this. And I hope our conversation has helped you today, dear friends. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to tune in for our next episode of Truth Be Bold.